When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, I want to talk about Euron's plotline because does George actually have a POV issue with that certain plotline? I'm going to kind of go through it, kind of talk about where I think the plotline is going to go just based upon where our POVs are at. We're going to talk a little bit about the Winds of Winter sample chapter because I think it's really relevant to this discussion and all of that. So when we look at where Euron is currently at, he's in quite a pickle, right? Because on one hand, he has the Red Wine fleet that's sailing from the southern part of Westeros, from Dorne, kind of coming around to fight Euron's ships, which have been raiding all along the western coast and has been getting further and further south into the Reaches area. Now, on the other hand, it seems that the High Towers are growing a bit overconfident. They're also sending a fleet from the north to kind of trap Euron's fleet. So you're in a tough situation, and I think most people believe that likely Euron is going to attack one of these fleets. To me, it makes more sense he attacks the High Tower fleet. It is not nearly as good of a quality as the Red Wine fleet. It would make perfect sense if that's where Euron is going currently in the story. But the real issue is, Euron is a character that's being built up as the next big bad of the series, right? Joffrey's gone, Ramsay likely is going to die in the next book, Littlefinger, there's a good chance he may die in the next book. So who is going to take over that mantle outside of the others, of course, of being our big bad character? And that seems to be Euron, with, again, having some sort of connection, it seems like, with the Three-Eyed Crow, having Valyrian steel armor, this massive fleet, wanting to become a god himself and spitting on all the gods in the world. He is built up as the next big bad. Now, what's quite interesting about Euron is, outside of the Winds of Winter sample chapter, we don't actually know all that much about Euron. We haven't really seen much of him. He's only been really involved in like 2 chapters outside of the Winds of Winter sample chapter where we've actually seen him. And even then, a lot of that was more public meetings. It was Euron maybe projecting or showing a performance, right? Especially like the King's Move, for instance. We don't really get to intimately see him until the Winds of Winter sample chapter. And so the issue that I think George may be having with the Euron plotline is, how do you give a good amount of time to Euron to develop him as a villain for the story and also to explore his campaign in the West? That to me is a central issue for this video. Because Euron, by the end of the Winds of Winter sample chapter, which could always be changed, George could always change how he wants to do that chapter, but I think likely that chapter is not going to change much. I think it's one of George's best written chapters he's ever made. It's super dark. I mean, it's really enjoyable to read in terms of just really good writing. But Euron, by the end of the chapter, I mean, he's been getting tortured for a good amount of time. He can't even stand, right? He's that weak. It's very similar to Ned, say, in the Black Cells for a good amount of time, but like taken to the extreme. Like Euron is not in a good condition. And so, regardless of him being strapped to the Silence and in the prow of that boat, he already is pretty close to dying, right? He's being underfed, not getting enough to drink, all those type of things. His body is breaking down. And so it seems like we're building up to this situation where the next battle that occurs, likely against the Hightower fleet, all of these people that are strapped to the prow are going to be killed in some sort of blood sacrifice because he has, for instance, warlocks, he has septons from Westeros. He's also sacrificing his unborn child. So there's a lot of really dark stuff going on. But the issue I have here is, how much of Euron are we going to see? Because if the Forsaken chapter stays the same, I think it will most likely stay the same. So we have 1 chapter with Euron there. We have probably a 2nd chapter where Euron is actually just showing us what's happening in the battle, and then probably will be his death at the end of it. Okay, then who is going to be the POV for Euron? Well, you might think, okay, well, Samwell is at Old Town. It would make sense for Euron to sack Old Town. Likely Sam could be our next character that sees into Euron. And there's also some interesting connections here because Euron seems to be the character bringing this apocalypse to Westeros. Sam could have the Horn of Winter that him and Jon found back in A Clash of Kings north of the Wall. It is also given a lot of focus by George. This isn't a video about the Horn of Winter, but it could be of relevance to this Euron character, We also know that the Faceless Men at this point, or Jaqen, is trying to get this book about dragons, likely because of the rise of the dragons with maybe Daenerys or maybe some other secrets that Euron could also be wanting to find. Old Town is the hub of knowledge and of books and things like that. Euron could also be wanting that there. There's also the idea of Leighton Hightower. He hasn't been seen of in a long time. Some say he's doing some sort of magic or sorcery, and there's still some intriguing things about House Hightower we just don't know yet. So there's a lot there, right? And so this is the issue that I have is how much of Euron will we see if this is the case, right? Will it feel really rushed? Because we really won't see Euron all that much if Aeron dies in 2 chapters, right? The Forsaken chapter, and then him in the next battle, which you will have to think he's going to die. If he's strapped to the prow in the coming battle, he's going to die. Like, that just seems more than likely. And so we then would maybe see Euron with Samwell for maybe a chapter or two. Maybe Euron, takes Samwell prisoner, all of that stuff. And that's what allows us to see through what Euron's doing at Old Town. Maybe that's the case. Maybe we don't even really see Euron. Maybe it's more like Samwell is learning news about what Euron's doing at Old Town while it's being sacked and all of that stuff. Maybe Samwell's able to flee, but upon fleeing, he sees the carnage Euron's, doing. And then we don't really see Euron maybe until the very end of the book, where possibly he could meet up with Cersei. Aeron does have this vision of, Euron on the throne and having this wife. There's not a lot to go off of in terms of who this woman is that's with Euron. Given the idea of proximity, right? Euron is going to have to marry somebody, it would seem like on the western side of Westeros. Also, Euron is looking for somebody that can help him conquer the Iron Throne and all that stuff. Daenerys right now just does not seem like an option. That would just, those two wouldn't even meet until a good portion into A Dream of Spring, in my opinion. So who is he going to marry? And I think something I discussed with JC on the channel, or The Advocate, was the idea of Euron and Cersei marrying. It makes sense. Cersei could be fleeing from King's Landing, going back to Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock and where Euron is currently at is not that far, especially with boats. And if he's able to win his battles in the West, Cersei would be a decent candidate. It could get the Westermen possibly behind Euron if Cersei's able to keep some sort of power. If Jaime stays maybe loyal to her, gives her the Lannister army, that's still up in the air. But either way, if that happened, that would be at the very end of A Winds of Winter, if we even get the book. That's a whole nother question. So the question I have there is that enough, right? Like what I just talked to you guys about, that's not a lot. That's maybe 5 chapters that we would possibly see Euron through, maybe 2 with Sam, 2 with Aeron, and maybe 1 at the very end of the book with Cersei. It just feels like for a major player and what seems like is going to be the big bad outside of the others in the books, it doesn't seem like enough time with the character. And so I wonder, do you guys think, I know George R.R. Martin has said it, he's not making any new POVs outside of possibly a prologue and an epilogue, but do we need one for Euron? Or is Euron's plot going to be different, right? Will Aeron actually survive, right? Maybe this is just Euron playing games with Aeron. He is basically psychologically torturing Aeron. Maybe it's this idea that, Aeron is being strapped to the prow more to scare him, more to, try to get Aeron to go away from his faith that so far is unwavering, but he's actually still going to torture him, and that's still going to be our POV into Euron until Cersei and him meet up. Very possible, but I think the idea that you're trying to trim down POVs, I think Aeron, he's going to die, I would say. It's just the question of when. Like, how early does George kill Aeron? And basically what it's been set up from the Forsaken chapter, it seems like relatively soon. So let me know what you guys think. I think that the Euron plotline is one we don't really think about in terms of maybe holding up George, because he just doesn't know how to integrate that story with the available POVs we have right now. Especially, I think that it isn't the main focus for him. I think right now he's really having to try and figure out how is he going to get through the Bran POV. Again, that seems a difficult one to me. We're going to be discussing Daenerys with some collabs, probably the very beginning of May. So we'll talk about that. Daenerys is a really big one that I think holds George back, given what she has to do. I think Euron, in terms of what his plot line is going to be in Winds of Winter, actually isn't all that much compared to a lot of the other POVs in the story, where They need to traverse an entire continent and get into Westeros. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.